My fellow majors, the next major update for the up-and-coming early access turn-based tactics title MENACE is finally here, and I have to say, this is a big one, as it's finally fixing one of the most boring and least fulfilling mechanics in the game. But alongside that, there's also some major nerfs, and I'm curious to see how those are going to shake out in terms of overall progression through a campaign. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including my ongoing coverage of the early access period for MENACE, then a like on this video, a subscription to the channel, and consideration of checking out my Patreon where I have weekly timed exclusive content for my patrons, well, that would be very much appreciated, as I'm sure you can imagine. So yes, today we are covering the major OCI rework patch for MENACE, which of course comes alongside a general quality of life update for a lot of other systems in the game, but the OCI rework is the biggest focus here, and one that I'm very happy to see, as frankly speaking, the OCI upgrades for the impetus were extremely boring up to this point. Most of your off-map abilities were just generally useless. You just wanted to max your intelligence, get as many upgrades as you could to reduce the cost of things and get more squaddies. Basically anything that you could do to facilitate the actual meat and potatoes of the game that was your on-the-ground mission-to-mission operations and how you were able to maintain your squads as you progressed through them. Now we have a much wider suite of abilities and a new progression system to upgrade them, which means that for the first time, Overhype does actually recommend that you start a new save to get the most of this system. You don't have to. All the footage that you're going to see of my gameplay in the background is using my current expert mode run, but to get the most of what it is that you have going on here and really experience the depth of the system, it is recommended that you start a new campaign. Do with that information what you will. If you want to read the full patch notes for this update, as well as a couple of hotfixes that have come out to fix major bugs, then I will have a link to the game's news page for Steam in the description down below. You can read over everything with a fine-toothed comb and a critical eye for yourself. Now, as far as that OCI rework is concerned, however, that is going to be our first major topic here. And you can already see, based off of this screen here, everything looks quite a bit different. Per Overhype themselves, quote, "We treated the current OCI system as a sort of placeholder for the more detailed and complex system we always had in mind. The OCI rework is the biggest change to the game during early access so far and will open up a whole new level of customization, decisions, and replayability." What this basically means is that the main sections of the impetus ship are all going to have their own specific upgrade trees, and alongside that, the three major factions that are currently in the game, and presumably other factions that get added over time, will have many more specific OCI upgrades that you're able to unlock as you progress through a campaign. The three sections have been renamed to Hull, Bridge, and Armament, and each of these comes with a small subset of very basic upgrades that are automatically unlocked to facilitate the start of a campaign without needing to build trust with a specific faction. Once you do start to build that trust, however, you're going to see a lot more, much more specific and powerful upgrades being made available to you that you will then be able to use your points to install on the ship, as you're probably used to if you've been playing the early access of MENACE up to this point. One of the first major changes to this system that I really enjoy is that there are certain basic aspects to each of the three major subsections of the ship that you will always have access to, even if you're adding additional upgrades on top of them. For example, upgrades to the bridge always include a +1 boost to your intelligence. So even if you're getting other more specific upgrades, you're not necessarily sacrificing the intel that you'll need to be able to see some enemy information on the battlefield, which is very nice. That was always one of my main issues with the OCI as it existed originally, where there were just certain types of upgrades and resources that were just better than others. Intel was massively important. The ability to reduce the deployment cost of certain types of units or get more squaddies were also massively important, and now a lot of those particular aspects are baked in to the specific subsections of the ship, which is awesome. To facilitate how many new upgrades there are, each faction has been upgraded to have 12 different OCI upgrades that you can unlock and 12 trust levels, up from the 8 that they previously previously had. However, from what I've seen thus far, it seems like you are able to upgrade your reputation with these factions much more quickly, which is great, because that means you'll be able to get a lot more of these upgrades in a little bit more of a timely fashion, as well as start unlocking the faction-specific bodyguard characters that you will then be able to recruit. Now, we can't talk about OCI upgrades and different off-map abilities without talking about how generally garbage off-map abilities were. If you're someone who's played games like Helldivers and had the ability to call in stratagems that are devastatingly powerful and very fun to use, you would kind of imagine from a tactics standpoint they would feel similar here in MENACE. However, previous to this update, they felt very slow and clunky most of the time. Yeah, it's really cool to be able to call in a dropship to do a strafing run and mess up a bunch of light infantry, but when it takes literal ages for that dropship to come in, and the enemy is able to see exactly where it's targeting and move out of the way before it does wind up actually spawning, it feels more like an area control tool and less like a direct damage dealer, which is fine in its own right, but doesn't quite fulfill the fantasy of what's being described to you. Now, though, your off-map abilities have been split into two different categories: orbital versus air power. Your orbital options are the ones that you would expect: targeted missile strikes, laser batteries, ion cannons, all that type of fun stuff. And while these are very powerful, they're also slower than the more directly deployed abilities that come from your dropships. I haven't had the opportunity to play around with these too much just yet. However, as is described in the patch notes, orbital abilities usually have a long delay of 2 turns until they reach the battlefield. However, they are usually more impactful than dropship/air power based ones. This is definitely going to be an interesting one to play around with, whether you're able to pin enemies in a particular position so that they get nailed by a big high power missile strike, or maybe they just aren't aware anymore of when one of those types of strikes is going to come in, allowing you to actually, hit them with it. We'll have to see, but it is nice that some of these have been split off so that a little bit more of a range can be created in how all these different abilities work. Speaking of which, we then do of course have the air power abilities, or the dropship deployed abilities, with the example here provided in the patch notes of Show of Force. This ability and others like it take 2 turns to prep once you activate them, but once you do, your dropship will be basically on standby, and then you will have a certain amount of time to activate it, at which point it will trigger immediately. You do need to use it before that time span runs out, otherwise the usage will be wasted because the dropship will, have to go off station, refuel, whatever. But it's nice to know that you'll have a lot more control over where and when you're actually able to bring that dropship in, while still needing to have a little bit of pre-planning and foresight about where you think you're going to wind up needing it in a couple turns time. And some of these abilities do look really cool. Again, we mentioned that Show of Force is one of the abilities that you can use, and this is where a recon dropship actually comes in and basically does a low-level strafing run of a group of enemies, which doesn't actually deal any damage, but it reveals enemies in the target area, as well as demoralizing and suppressing them. And yeah, I can imagine why, because having a gigantic 200-ton dropship suddenly buzzing my head 15 feet above me is probably going to make me put my face in the dirt and not pay too close attention to what the very angry Marine with a very big shotgun is doing as he approaches my position. There are, of course, a bunch of upgrades with various different abilities for your dropships in this air power section, and I imagine there could very well be more that get added over time. I'm very excited to make more use of these instead of, all of my ship's arsenal being just laser turrets that I drop down and use as cannon fodder and the occasional extra bit of DPS. Now, of course, though, the law of equivalent exchange is always in effect with major changes like this, and while a lot of these abilities sound like they're going to be much more useful and fun in practice, they do also have a much greater downside now. That downside is that now, rather than there being a set number of uses per mission for each of your off-map abilities, there's a set number of uses per operation. Meaning if you are on a 8-mission operation, you might only have 3 uses of a particularly powerful missile strike to stretch across all of them. So you're going to have to be way smarter about when and where you actually deploy these abilities. Now, granted, there's no extra cost associated with them. You're not paying supplies or discipline or whatever to be able to actually trigger these abilities, but that is very limiting, and I'm afraid that it's kind of going to turn into a little bit of like a Final Fantasy, well, I've hoarded 99 elixirs to the end game type of scenario, so I didn't want to use them at a time where I felt I could maybe squeak by without them. Feel like we're going to potentially wind up in a similar type of situation here, but we'll have to see how the devs at Overhype decide to balance all of this. It's a little bit of a shame to see, and it does curb things like laser turret spam, but If it's been designed well, then it should be fine, so we'll have to see. Overall, I feel like the OCI rework has been handled pretty damn well, and I'm eager to jump into a new campaign to really see how it feels as you slowly unlock all of the upgrades for it. But even just seeing all of the new abilities that you have on hand, it makes it very exciting. I mean, we've got awesome stuff like an orbital bunker drop that you can just deploy onto the battlefield to load your dudes into to give them a bunch of defense and make them way harder to take out. That's really cool, and the sort of sci-fi shenanigans that I would expect from a game like Menace. It seems like it's trying to lean into a very pseudo-realistic military ground infantry engagement sort of game while still giving you starships and laser batteries and the like. There's got to be some pizzazz in there, and these types of upgrades I think are going to really provide that. However, these are not the only updates that have been provided with this new change to the game, and we're going to go through the rest of them right now. First off, we do have a little bit of a UI improvement, allowing us to see your current distance when you're looking at your sort of effective range for different weapons. If you've never really paid attention to this before, well, first of all, you really should, but each different type of weapon, vehicle, cannon, turret, whatever, has an ideal range graph associated with it when you're looking at things like your accuracy and your armor penetration. Before, you could just see what the ideal breakpoint between damage and accuracy were, but still have to eyeball the distance between you and the target to kind of get an idea of how close you were to that ideal point on the graph. Now there is a separate bar that actually shows you that, so you can a little bit more accurately calculate just how much damage and how much accuracy you're going to have against whatever it is that you're shooting at. Very nice. There's also been a major overhaul to your maximum authority and the maximum number of squaddies that you can have, which is something that was very much a pain point for me, even though I hadn't really vocalized it before. Authority's always been a little bit of a weird system because you generally want to have as many squad leaders and pilots on hand as possible. Beyond the fact that, of course, what ones you wind up being able to recruit are randomized in most scenarios, and some are definitely better than others for general combat scenarios. The interplay between keeping your authority high so that your discipline was good, but also making sure that you had enough squad leaders and pilots on hand in case people got injured or wound up becoming weary or whatever, having random negative status effects applied to them. It was a weird balance, and one that I never really felt like I was in a lot of control over. Now, authority's actually been changed to where you have a maximum of 120, and you can then spend those points over the course of a campaign to recruit more SLs, while also being able to get OCI upgrades that further adds discipline and authority to your total tally. So now you have a much clearer idea of how many resources you have to spend on recruiting new characters and directly how much of an impact it's going to have on your capability, while still having other very intentional ways of patching that up if you go on a major spending spree and pick up a bunch of characters. This also means that there will be a little bit more of a choice when you go to actually get new recruits and see, well, you know, I'm pretty late in a campaign. I don't really need Jean Sai at this point. Maybe we'll let her go, not spend the authority to recruit her, and wait until I can get someone more useful so that my discipline doesn't take too much of a hit. It just feels like it's going to be a little bit of a more interactive system now, and I'm very happy to see that. As far as your squaddies are concerned, I'm very happy with this change. There are now a lot more squaddies that you're going to be able to get from mission to mission, especially once you upgrade your OCI. Previously, I felt like I was pretty much always hiring new squaddies from the black market, which could get very expensive very quickly, but it was a necessity because a lot of my favorite squad leaders are ones like Lim and Van Plu, who really do want to be up in the thick of the fight, and means that accidentally they just kind of get shot and lose dudes quite often. Now you can get way more squaddies, but there's also an upper limit of how many you can recruit before you have to build more housing on the impetus. It starts at 60, and you can upgrade it a decent amount through your various OCI upgrades as you go. Now, I can't really imagine a world where you just have 60 squaddies sitting around, but on the flip side, with one of our new squad leaders that allows you to just get squaddies for free by recruiting enemy squads while you're in the middle of a firefight, maybe it'll be easier to get there than I'm currently expecting. I think though this is really going to help alleviate one of the issues that I was running into, where I found it just far more efficient to run massed armor and vehicles over large squads of troops, just because I had more vehicles on hand and it was easier to keep them around rather than constantly having to re-up and resupply my numbers of squaddies to add to my different squad leaders. I think this is going to add a much greater balance and make it a little bit more reasonable to not just run max stealth sniper builds to try and keep your squaddies alive, especially on expert mode. Finally, we have a bunch of quality of life and general visual improvements that we always seem to get with these major updates, in particular new weapon and armor skins, as well as animations for when you're using pistols, which is very nice. Now, if you have a squad whip out a set of pistols, they will actually pull out pistols to fire with, and if you have pistols equipped on a squad, you will see them holstered on their belts, which is a very nice little attention to detail thing. We'll have new armory idle animations to accommodate certain types of weapons, including pistols, and we have a bunch of new skins for all sorts of different gear, including the P99A3, the KSAS DMR, the SAPP high intensity setup, operator setup, and I believe it's Recce setup. People corrected me on this a few videos back, but I can't quite remember what y'all said anymore. Feel free to correct me again if needed, and a bunch of other major patch notes. Beyond things that we've already mentioned from the larger sections above, we have some key changes such as enemy reinforcements being reworked to be, quote, more fair and less frustrating. It's definitely felt better in gameplay thus far, although I can't really pinpoint how exactly it's changed, so do feel free to give me your input on that one based on what your experience has been since the update. Player vehicles can now move through some civilian units, and the Bombardier's acid spit armor penetration has been reduced from 50 to 35, which of course, if anyone has been as abused by alien bombardiers like I have, this is a very welcome change. As you might expect, there are also a ton of different bug fixes, some of which feel more major than others. The ones that stand out to me in particular are the grind down skill was giving 30% armor pen instead of 30% armor damage, which is not necessarily a bad thing in terms of overall gameplay mechanics, but definitely doesn't match the description of what it's actually supposed to do, so that's good to see fixed. Concealment from light forests / tall grass wasn't counting for the ice in the veins skill of one of the new SLs, which was a shame because he is very fun to use. I quite like him. And the run over skill sometimes didn't work when you performed it diagonally, and as a Reiwa enjoyer, I definitely felt the pain from that one myself. Happy to see that fixed. Again, if you want to see the full list of all these different bug fixes and changes, I do recommend that you check out the full patch notes linked down in this video description. But those are the major points that I think are most important to talk about. Overall, this is a very good, very much needed change for Menace, and I do agree with Overhype when they describe the overhaul to the OCI as the biggest change to the game yet. I think it really did feel a little lacking in the quote-unquote metagame progression due to how lackluster so many OCI upgrades were, especially once you got good rep with a bunch of different factions and just saw the universally good things to have to make your moment-to-moment gameplay in the field feel better overall. Like, why would I care about having the ability to generate an earthquake in a localized area when I can just drop a barrage of laser turrets to take fire for my troops and lay down a massive field of laser fire in return to deal a good chunk of damage to the enemy for literally no cost? I am a little worried about the nerfs that have come with some of those off-map abilities, but I do think it's going to be a net improvement for the system overall, and with any luck, we're going to see some really wacky upgrades with other factions that get added over time. With all that said, though, this has been my overview of the next major update for Menace. Let me know your thoughts about this patch, as well as my coverage of it in the comments down below. What else are you hoping to see changed or added as we approach the full release of the game in a, relatively speaking, short amount of time at this point? I'd love to have that conversation with all y'all down in the comments, but for now, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Thank you all so very much for watching. Thank you to all my channel supporters whose names you're seeing scroll by on the right side of the screen right now. It'd be much harder to do all of this without that direct support. And most importantly, over anything else, I hope that you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there, everybody. And remember, be good to each other, y'all. Bye now.